Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome so much to this rather late session. And I would like to thank the Delhi IIP to give me an opportunity to talk to you today. So I'll just be briefly talking about Kawasaki disease and what's new about it. And this is just going to be a run through because it is rather late. I'm going to consider for you this evening a few important new developments for diagnosis of incomplete Kawasaki. How will you define an abnormal echo when you see one? What are the new things that are coming about in the acute management? What about anti-thrombotic in the long-term care? So really the go-to paper, if you listen to nothing else but just this, is the go-to paper for management of Kawasaki disease must be the American Heart Association 2017 position paper, and a lot of what I'm going to talk is coming from here. So incomplete Kawasaki disease, you're aware about this consensus algorithm, which was given by the AHA in 2005. This has currently been superseded by this new algorithm, which has been published in 2017. It's very important for us to understand that if a child has less than 3 criteria of Kawasaki disease that you're very familiar with, note that it is an inflammatory condition. And when you look at these patients, always remember to look at the SGPT and the serum albumin in addition to the complete blood count. Also remember to look at the urine. And if the child is fitting more than 3 laboratory criteria and has high inflammatory markers, don't forget to do the echo. This is extremely important. The other very important thing which the AHA paper has pointed out is which are the clinical scenarios where you must consider incomplete Kawasaki. Those are young infants under 6 months of age with prolonged fever, a child with prolonged fever and aseptic meningitis, a so-called culture negative shock that you may be treating as a bacterial sepsis, a child who has a cervical adenopathy that is currently unresponsive to therapy, and a child who's got a parapharyngeal phlegmon that is non-responsive. So remember, these are conditions where you must think of incomplete Kawasaki. Why is it important? Because children with incomplete Kawasaki have a 30% of risk of developing a coronary artery lesion, and therefore you must be very vigilant for these children. Let's now come on to the second important issue I'd like to cover. How do you define an abnormal 2D echo? The American Heart Association has given very clearly what are the sizes of a small, moderate, and large coronary artery aneurysm. And these are all defined, as you're aware, by a Z score. So what's a Z score? A Z score is defined as abnormal if it is more than 2 standard deviations and a 2.5 standard deviation, and that is a coronary artery dimension which is more than 2.5 standard deviation above the mean for the particular body surface area of that child's age. And note that if you have one arterial segment which is abnormal of more than 2 SD, it is likely only in 0.6% of the normal population. And when you go to a Z score of more than 3, then the percentage positivity in the normal population is only 0.1%. Note that the LMCA should be interpreted with caution because it has got a variable cause, and therefore you must interpret isolated LMCA dilatation with caution. So that's said about the definition of the Z scores, and also currently the definition in the 2017 has again been modified. And if the child does not have a Z score of more than 2.5, then you look at certain other features in combination when you do the echo and think of abnormality. And these include a decreased left ventricular function, mitral regurgitation, pericardial effusion, or a Z score between 2 and 2.5 and 2 of the arteries mentioned there. Of note, what was earlier mentioned in 2005 of increased perivascular coronary artery brightness, the lack of tapering or utilizing the Japanese criteria have been excluded. So these are very important as you interpret the findings of the echo that you get done. Let's now go on to management. I think the most important thing you should understand about the management today is that you need to stratify the patient. So for example, if you see a child with enteric fever, you're not going to treat every child of enteric fever with the same drug. You may want to give someone oral, someone IV, some a touch of steroid, someone inotrope, someone who's got a perforation may require to be opened up, and so on and so forth. So what are you doing? In your mind, you are stratifying the patient with enteric fever. In the same way, when you have a child with Kawasaki disease, please remember that one size does not fit all. All patients are not the same, and you need to stratify the child. So let's look at the clinical considerations. A very young infant under 6 months is likely to run into trouble. A child who's got cytopenias is specifically if the child has got a sky-high ferritin and has got a lowish platelet count, may require steroid. A child who's presenting with shock is obviously going to require steroid and vasopressors both. And a child who's got a concurrent infection is going to require the appropriate antimicrobial, antiviral, or antibiotic as the case may be. And what is very important is a child who presents to you in the clinic with coronary artery lesions. Why is this important? We are sitting in the center of the country in Delhi, and in our own data, we see that 45% of patients who are referred to us are already coming to us with coronary artery lesions. And clearly, those patients need increased therapy. The second important thing is if a child presents to you with coronary artery lesion, we'll come to what anti-inflammatory medication you want to use. But remember, in patients with Kawasaki disease, if they have got significant coronary artery dilatation, what are you trying to prevent? You're trying to prevent an acute coronary artery thrombosis. So in addition to the anti-inflammatory, you're going to use an anti-thrombotic drug. Which drug are you going to use for which patient? Again, the key word for you is stratify. This is an excellent table, which is from the AHA 2017 paper that gives you very clear guidance as to which drug you're going to use for which patient. We don't have the time to go through all this, but let's pick up, for example, 5.2. A patient has a large or a giant coronary artery aneurysm, which has now become small as you followed up the patient. How are you going to treat the patient? What are you going to use? You're going to use low-dose aspirin. You are going to use warfarin. You may want to now switch the child to a combination of clopidogrel and aspirin. You may consider beta blocker for the child and perhaps use a statin as well. So it's very clearly delineated as to which drug you need to use depending upon the current size of the coronary artery lesion. Somebody is writing on the slide. Can I request you not to do that, please? And finally, the third concept that I'd like you to understand is that there are three ways of treating a patient. The first thing is that you use just IVIG and aspirin, which is standard of care. The second is that you have identified by some clinical method or some score, for example, a Kobayashi score, that just IVIG is not going to be adequate for the child, and therefore you add a second layer to this patient's treatment. For example, you may want to add steroids. And when you're adding a second agent upfront, that model of management is called primary intensification. And then maybe your child did not do very, very well with the first dose of IVIG, persisted to have fever, and you then are going to rescue the child by adding a second agent. So there are three methods of therapy: standard, primary intensification, and rescue. So what are the change agents we can use for these patients who are unwell, who come to us with KD? So really the anti-inflammatories are four: aspirin, IVIG, steroids, and anti-TNF agents. Let's briefly run through them. Aspirin. Excellent meta-analysis, more than 8,000 patients, mostly patients from the Korean peninsula. And what did they show? This paper showed that the coronary artery aneurysm based on the Z score was higher when a higher dose of aspirin was used, suggesting very clearly that high dose aspirin is not good for your patient. And then came about another excellent paper which compared in a large number of patients, I think the number of patients were 260, what was the outcome change about the fever and the coronary artery lesion in two groups of patients, one who were given less than 10 milligram per kg of aspirin, one who were given high dose. There was no change in the fever, in the coronary artery lesion, or the length of stay. Thus again telling us that high dose aspirin is not a very good idea. And here's the Cochrane database review that said that there's insufficient evidence to give high dose aspirin to all patients. So question you have to ask yourself, you're using 80 to 100 milligram per kg for your child, are you harming that patient? Coming to IVIG, this was the landmark paper of 1984. Again, the study came from Japan, which showed very clearly that if you had two groups of patients, one given aspirin and the other IVIG and aspirin, the risk of coronary artery lesion in the group given IVIG was remarkably less. And following this, it became the standard of care. So there's no discussion on IVIG. It's the standard of care for all children with Kawasaki disease. And what is the 2017 paper talking about the primary management of these patients? They talk about of a moderate or a high dose of aspirin So they've left the decision to you, and they talk about intravenous immunoglobulin. All right. So this is where the 2017 paper leaves us. What about now coming to the next management protocol, which is primary intensification of therapy? You know that for the last 50 years, using steroids was an absolute no-no. And this was based on a very small, rather flawed study by Cato that was published in 1979, following which steroids were not used across the world. And then came many years later, in 2007, the Neuberger paper that looked at a pulse of high-dose steroid in an unselected population of Kawasaki disease, and they as well showed that there was no difference in the coronary artery lesions. And you can look at these bars. The risk of coronary artery abnormality at baseline, week 1, week 5 was not any different whether the patient was given intravenous pulsed methylprednisolone or not. And pulse here was 30 milligram per kg. And following this paper publication, steroids were absolutely not used for the next decade. And then along came in 2012, a very interesting study from Japan, which showed us that in a selected group of Kawasaki patients, where you anticipated they were not going to respond, and in this set of patients, it was using the Kobayashi score. If you used upfront primary intensification with low-dose steroids, the patients did remarkably well. So well that the trial had to be terminated, telling us that in selected patients, steroids are very good, and this was confirmed on further meta-analysis, and therefore it was understood that steroids are very good in a small subset of patients with Kawasaki disease. The Cochrane database that came out in January 2017 suggested you should use steroids in all children with Kawasaki disease. What does the AHA paper state? The AHA paper is again ambiguous. It's left the decision to you. Because of the Neuberger paper, they say don't use high dose. But if you can identify the child who's unlikely to respond, go ahead and use the dose that the Japanese use, which is 2 milligram per kg per day. And this is the features which are taken to calculate a Kobayashi score. And outside of the Japanese subcontinent, the score has been shown to be specific but not very sensitive. That is to say, if a patient in India meets the Kobayashi score of more than 4, they're unlikely to respond, but you don't have to rely only on that, because with that you miss a lot. And along comes a fantastic review just a couple of months ago. Again, this is from Japan. What is this study about? 1,593 historical controls were taken of Kawasaki disease, and those patients had got only IVIG. They were compared to the new group of children who were given IVIG and steroids as primary intensification, and look and see the risk of developing coronary lesions if you were given steroids was remarkably lower than the historical cohort, such that the internationally recognized figure, Professor Jane Burns, has written an editorial suggesting we really do need to revisit patients to be given steroids. We won't spend much time, but just talking about anti-TNF, using infliximab upfront primary intensification, no effect. Using etanercept upfront, no effect. Using cyclosporin, no effect. What does the AHA primary intensification say about anti-TNF? It does not talk a lot about it at all. Another drug, cyclosporin, not much effect at all. What about the child who has presented to your clinic with Kawasaki disease and already has aneurysms when you first see the patient? This is a retrospective review just published about a year ago. If in case you are given only IVIG, you continue to have an increase in the coronary artery Z score. But if you are given primary intensification with steroid or infliximab, you tend to do better. Once your patient has not responded, let's now come on to the rescue therapy. Giving only IVIG, is that sensible? Not very sensible, because half those patients don't respond. What has the AHA paper said? They have left it open and said if your patient didn't respond first time around, you have a menu choice, and they've left it really quite complicated.
Yes. Dr. Sujata, request to, if you can speed up the discussion, please.
Yes, I'll be finishing in exactly half a minute. What about still being awaited? This is the use of anti-TNF versus IVIG in a failed patient. And I think the European consensus, which has come out more recently, tells us very clearly which are the patients who need to be given steroids. Those are the children who didn't respond to the first IVIG. If they have a high Kobayashi score, if they present with HLH shock, they are infants or they already have aneurysms. So steroids are not so bad after all, and one size does not fit all. And remember that we know that you can get Kawasaki disease with infections. And here's a patient with a SWAS abscess. And of course, now you know that you have seen MISC or PIMS-TS patients with COVID-19 infections as well. So the AHA 2017 paper needs to be looked at very carefully. You need to interpret it very carefully and don't be confused. Think rationally as to how you want to understand this literature which has been published. We have changed our practice in our unit. If a patient has any coronary artery lesion, they are given upfront steroid with IVIG. If they don't have a lesion, they are given 30 milligram of aspirin along with IVIG. And the role of the antiplatelet agent or the anticoagulation depends upon the size of the coronary artery lesion. There's also excellent data on how to systematically follow up the patients if they have a coronary artery lesion, and that we will leave for another day. But just to leave you with the concluding slide, so the management of Kawasaki disease is dynamic. It has changed remarkably in the last couple of years. Life has certainly come a full circle. We are not scared of steroids any longer. You need to stratify your patient both clinically and as for the coronary artery lesion. And this is both acutely and for the follow-up. And now that we know that Kawasaki is occurring in children with COVID-19, should we really state that it's not a single disease, but a syndrome which may have many, many triggering agents? And thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We welcome